Stanley cups were all the rage in America in the past few years and have now sneaked their way into European markets. So in this video I will make two 3-dimensional cup toppers from polymer clay manufactured in Italy to resemble Italian pasta to decorate these water cups. But let's first talk about the rise of that product and the complete insanity surrounding it, which by the way has made people overconsume, resell the cup at 3 to 5 times the original cost, be bullied for not having the cup, steal, jeopardize their job and injure one another, all for a chance to get their hands on one of these cups. First, let's talk about what is the viral Stanley cup. Honestly guys, it is just a stainless insulated cup to hold your water. The bottom of this quencher style is more narrow in width to fit a cup holder in a car, and it features reusable plastic straw. The cup everyone went absolutely crazy for, which wasn't even leak-proof, which means that you cannot dump it in your handbag and totally forget about it. Instead, girls have been proudly carrying this cup in their hands with the same pride as Beverly Hills housewives would hold the luxury handbag that costs more than your quarterly mortgage. So for a modern day influencer, this is not just a cup. This is a symbol of how trendy they are, especially if they have a dedicated purpose-made bag or a sling to carry the cup in, bunch of accessories layered on top of the cup, upgraded leak-proof lid, silicone drink divider to fit inside the cup to allow you to pour 2 types of soft drink inside, dedicated ice making molds in the shape of a cup, a silicone grip to protect the bottom of the cup from chipping, a lipstick holder that attaches on the texture part of the cup with a heart-shaped sticker, or a little pill box to clip on top of the handle for your vitamins, you know. The list just goes on, but don't forget that a real influencer will have one cup in every color, so it perfectly matches her outfit of the day. This is seen as a sign of wealth, as each cup costs $45. And having a wall at home dedicated to display your Stanley Cup collection has been a very desirable item, to the point where Amazon was promoting display units for showcasing Stanley collections. The whole purpose of having a reusable cup is to have only one, so that it's environmentally friendly and sustainable. But having multiple of these, it's still way better than having tons of plastic ones. However, is it really that good to have one in every color Stanley releases, especially given the lifespan of fads? Before Stanley, people collected other brands, so will these same people disregard the entire collection of the Stanley Cups when the next brand will have their spotlight in the sun? Let's face it, this is not about sustainability, it is about looking and feeling good. Mr. William Stanley invented all-steel double-wall vacuum bottle in 1913 because he wanted his coffee to stay warm all day. He stuck his name on the bottle, and the company always marketed themselves towards hikers, campers, working class men who typically work outdoors and would need a large container to keep their liquids either very cold or hot for a prolonged period of time whilst they are on a trip or a ship. The cups and flasks were not cute. They were all large, basic, and used grey, navy, and green color, but it was their standard for more than 100 years, until 2016, when they released this quencher style cup, which is the one that almost broke the internet. For 3 years after the release of the product, it wasn't really selling, and actually, it wasn't really that remarkable. It was just another cup, and people were already using Yeti, thermos, and hydro flask, all of which were cheaper than Stanley products. Stanley were even considering to discontinue the Quencher cup, but then 3 bloggers who founded a website called The Buy Guide liked the cup and started recommending it. Women started buying, but the cups were difficult to find at this point, which in turn made this product even more desirable. Suddenly, the supply could meet the demand, and women became desperate for this must-have everyday water cup. Company's response to this was very obvious. They made more cups but in new color ranges, invested a little bit more in their marketing, and just let the influencers do their job, which was the perfect recipe for creating a viral trend. It is alarming that influencer marketing has become so effective that everyone knows what Stanley Cup is these days. Previously, the company was sitting at a comfortable $70 million revenue annually, but in contrast, after Quencher Cup trend kicked off, they made $750 million in revenue in 2023. This is absolutely insane growth and showcases just how crazy popular this cup has been. The sole purpose of my channel is to talk about polymer clay, so you can skip this section of the video and go straight to the tutorial whilst I take a moment and provide a little bit of social commentary on crazy things people have done to get their hands on one of these Quencher's cups, just to give a little bit of background to those who haven't seen videos on the questionable behaviour of people's buying patterns. Let's first talk about Stanley releasing Valentine's Day limited edition cups that featured a tiny heart at the front. The night before, people started camping outside the Target store, which is a US equivalent of UK's Asda shop, and the cups sold out in 4 minutes in the Arizona store. Few creators filmed people running in the store as soon as it opened, the same way news outlets show people pushing each other and running to the store shelves during the Black Friday sale events. However, on this occasion there was no sale, it was still $45. Some creators have now removed the actual footage from their TikTok accounts as the videos were reported due to showing violence, but there are still snippets featuring on TikTok where other creators discuss the incidents and the fights breaking out over the cup. Shops also had to limit them to only 2 cups per customer. Employees were caught stashing the product aside to buy later after their shift, which is against the company policy, so they were caught doing it and lost their jobs over this cup. I have linked a couple of articles in the description of this video so you can actually go and read a little bit more about these topics. The same went for Starbucks and Stanley collab, but people took it a step further and started stealing the cups instead of fighting for a chance to purchase one. A customer of Starbucks live streamed it on TikTok and this footage was later banned too. I don't know about you, but it is absolutely fascinating for me to have seen such behavior over a cup, as it almost doesn't even sound true, to be honest. People were buying the maximum allowed limit of the Stanley Cups in stores for $45 for the largest size and then selling these on eBay for $150. And I'm emphasizing when I'm saying selling, not attempting to sell. Now let's discuss the next holiday, Christmas. Have you seen videos online where young children are crying, laughing and losing their minds over the excitement of getting a Stanley Cup for Christmas? As a child, practical items like a cup would have not been on my Christmas list. Kids are not actually excited to stay hydrated. They're excited to being considered cool as they get to carry a Stanley Cup around the school. There are lots of examples on TikTok and I have linked the article below about the kids being bullied in school in America for not having a Stanley. So this kind of explains why children desperately wanted these for Christmas, which is kind of heartbreaking to know, right? There are some strangely popular TikTok accounts dedicated to only showing off people unboxing Stanley Cup. It is bizarre to say the least, and it makes me wonder if people really want to be seen unboxing a cup, or is it just another trend and they don't really care about the cup itself? Because is it really an organic thing that people are into, showing off how they're opening a packet of a cup? Is there so much of this unboxing content because influencers are paid to do so and it is now a huge earning potential and everyone else follows like a sheep as it appears to be cool? Pay attention to captions, as paid Stanley influencers will state that there are Stanley partners somewhere in there. It can be a sly hashtag at the end of the sentence or also a sentence thanking a brand for sending the product to them. And remember that most trends are engineered to be exactly that, a trend. So where do you stand on this? Do you genuinely believe this is a good cup? You may be wondering, why am I sounding skeptical when I have this cup myself? Well, this was an unexpected surprise at Christmas last year, and truth be told, I waited 5 months after receiving it to take my first sip out of it. Truth be told, it's a bloody heavy cup to carry around and I'm scared to spill the water on my laptop. And I know, you can remove the straw, you can take this lid and turn it sideways to close the straw gap, but even that makes me worried. In all fairness, I have maybe been a little bit embarrassed to carry it around, which may seem ridiculous to some, as in the USA people are bullied for not having it, but in Europe you are more likely to be laughed at for having this American fad, as it's okay over here to use things till they break. Maybe not as much in the UK, but mainland Europe for sure. With everything I have said earlier, I am not laughing at people who fell victims to this fad and feel that they need this in every single color. Hey, we all have certain weaknesses, right? We all love collecting something. I'm just finding it quite humorous, as I have never seen such obsession over an everyday item such as a cup. But before I move on to creating segment of this video, one really cool thing about Stanley Cup that I do want to highlight is the video the woman took after her car burned down. She got into the burnt car to pick up her Stanley Cup and it still had ice in it. I mean, I do not know if that was a true legitimate video, but they do really keep the drinks cool for a very long time. Stanley Company saw the video and it was an excellent word of mouth for them, so they bought a new car for this lady. How cool is that? To protect my tabletop, I am placing a non-slip drawer liner underneath the bathroom ceramic tile I'm working on. This is air dry clay my brother gifted me on Christmas 6 years ago, thinking it was the same as polymer clay. I am using this to create a cavity mold, but feel free to use scrap polymer clay or foil for this step instead, utilizing the materials that you already have at home. Here you can see that with proper storage, this clay is as good as new even 6 years after opening the package. This clay was invented in 1950s by poet and ceramist Dario Sala, and thus have been selling it since 1963. If you have never worked with this modeling clay, you will be surprised how nice to the touch it feels. My partner got me a dedicated dust roller. Yes, the boys in my life used to give me things for the wrong type of clay, but they were trying, and I'm using these gifts today. You might notice some heavy breathing here and there. I was filming this while loaded with a cold, so please ignore my dramatic lungs. Alright, take the cup lid, press it onto the clay to get the outline, and then cut it out with a scalpel. Here you see me placing an electrician's ferrule wire connector in place of the straw. Polymer clay artists often use this tool as a clay cutter, but do not worry about it at this step. My scalpel was more dragging than cutting, so it's time for a new blade. Then use your fingers to tidy up the edges of the circle, giving it a nice, smooth finish. Next, I place the air dry clay on top of the lid to make sure it fits nicely in there, but it's important not to leave it that way. Instead, place cling film as a protective barrier between the clay and the lid to prevent any potential damage to the lid from the clay. Once wrapped in cling film, place your clay inside the lid and pat it down to eliminate any gaps where the raised part of the lid was. Then push the clay toward the edges of the lid to make sure that the whole surface of the lid is covered. This has filled the space where the straw typically fits, so now we will use that ferrule wire connector to recreate that gap for the straw. When you purchase a set of these electrician's wire connectors, you'll find that the red one is the perfect size for the Stanley straw. The lid is only halfway filled with clay at this stage, so now we will add another layer of clay in attempt to fill it. Use the lid as a template to trace and cut the circle out of clay like we did previously, and smush that clay right into the lid. I added the small circle cutter into the straw gap to cut the second layer of clay too. Make sure that cling film covers the outer edges of the lid too, as the third layer of clay will cover them, but before that, use your fingers to stretch the clay toward the edges of the cup, leaving no gaps behind. It's normal for clay to have slight indentations where your thumbs have pressed, but aim to smooth the surface as evenly as possible. If you are using kitchen foil as the cavity mold, you have to just pack it in and around the lid in one go instead of 3 separate layers. Now I am rolling out the final sheet of air dry clay for us to place over the lid. Remember to also cut a hole for the straw in the final layer. Don't stress too much about making this last layer of clay perfectly smooth. Our main focus is to ensure that the inside creates an accurate impression of the lid and that there are no gaps between the layers to prevent any cracking during the drying process. I had a little gap at the side of the lid there, but I patched it up with a little bit of clay, so no biggie. Now let's use a blade to trim away the excess clay that overlaps. The remaining piece of clay will return to its original packaging for another 6 years. Just kidding. Using it today reminded me of how much I genuinely enjoy working with it. This might sound odd, but have you ever fed a horse? When a horse gently took food from my palm and its lips brushed against my hand, it felt like touching the softest skin imaginable. As strange as it might seem, this modeling clay has the same level of softness for me. To keep it for future use, I returned it to its packaging, rolled it up, and then placed it in a sealable sandwich bag, ensuring that I squeezed out all the air first. We are now ready to set this lid aside for drying. This makes me impatient and definitely one of the reasons why I could never do resin art. This clay really gets into all the little creases of your skin, but it washes off easily. It typically takes 24 hours for every 1 centimeter of thickness to dry, so after 24 hours it was still a little damp, but after 72 hours it was absolutely perfect. Although the clay was dry after 72 hours and easily detached from the lid at that point, I didn't have the time to continue with the project, so I left it for another 2 weeks. During this period, the clay dried even more and nearly fused with the lid, very reminiscent of the Spice Girls song 2 Become One. I found it quite challenging to separate the clay from the lid. If you're following the same air dry clay process that I did, be sure to remove the clay from the lid earlier than I did. However, I refused to accept the defeat. Few bits chipped from the edge, but now we have our cavity mold, and thanks to the cling film, the lid has not suffered any damage during the making of it. Let's condition my scrap clay now. The cavity mold we just made holds the impression made from the lid, and now we will use it to make an oven-safe core mold that resembles a Stanley lid. There are 2 reasons for this. The Stanley cup lid is made of plastic, so we cannot put it in the oven, but we want to create the lid decor from clay and cure it on the fake lid. This way, we get the exact dimensions and shape needed for a perfect fit on the real cup. I had a 10-year-old bottle of Keto Repel gel at home, and I decided to apply it to the air dry clay to help release polymer clay later. However, you'll see later on that this gel didn't work for me, so I recommend that you use talc powder or Armor All protectant on the base of the cavity mold instead. Here you can see me using a smoothing tool to press the polymer clay deeper into the mold. We need to make sure the entire cavity is completely filled. If you used kitchen aluminum foil to make the cavity, be careful not to apply too much pressure at this stage, as foil can bend easily even when packed tightly. Once the mold is filled, we'll place it in the oven. Although the cavity mold is made from air dry clay and normally isn't baked, you can put it in a cold oven and let it heat gradually to the temperature required to cure the polymer clay. Some artists place das air dry clay in the oven on very low heat to speed up drying, but this can sometimes cause cracking. In our case, we won't need the cavity mold after this, as it's only being used as a tool to shape the polymer clay. Therefore, some minor cracking is a risk worth taking. I waited for the clay to cool down so I wouldn't burn my fingers. You know, these fingers are valuable assets. There is a small crack at the top here, but it's not an issue. Once cooled, I tried to separate the polymer clay from the air dry clay, but it wasn't easy, so I reached for my favorite tool. If you know me, you know that the Fimo Professional Smoothing Tool is hands down one of the best tools I've ever purchased. Since I still couldn't separate the layers, I gently broke the edges of the air dry clay, and shortly after I was finally able to split the two pieces. I'm very happy with how the polymer clay lid impression turned out. It feels smooth overall, and the small imperfection on the right hand side is barely noticeable. The next step is to wash the mold to remove any residue left from the air dry clay and the Kato repel gel. For cleaning, I'm using a handmade soap wrapped in wool. My friend makes these and I find her so perfect for getting into small crevices. It's also amazing when I work with highly pigmented clays such as red colors which tend to stain my hands. With this soap, I don't need to scrub for long, it just removes everything effortlessly. I also use these wool soaps for cleaning cricket mats. My friend's Instagram account is Works from Seoul, so feel free to message her if you're looking for natural soap with antibacterial wool wrapping. This is not a sponsored ad or anything like that, just super happy to share something I am enjoying from another maker. And now for the star of the show, Das Smart, a polymer clay manufactured in Italy, the same country that gifted us pasta machines which many of us now use for conditioning clay. I don't even know how spaghetti and ravioli artisans feel about that. Well, anyway, unlike the classic Das air dry modeling clay that has been around since 1950s, Das Smart was introduced in 2017 after a major factory upgrade. Production paused during the pandemic, but they've come back strong with 46 colors now available in many countries. You can check out my other YouTube video where I met Lucrezia, a representative from Das. One standout feature of Das Smart is its packaging. It's designed to be thin enough to go straight through the pasta machine right out of the packet and with no preconditioning by hand required. This one here is Cosclay Primary Yellow. It's worth noting that Fimo also has several yellow shades such as lemon, sunflower, true yellow and so on. I also pulled out some Sculpey products for comparison, and as you can see, the tones vary a lot from brand to brand. Since we're making pasta today, a slightly muted yellow is actually perfect for the look that we want. At the moment, this Das Smart Yellow Lemon is a little too vibrant for pasta, so let's add some number 26 clay that they have named after sand. I began by conditioning yellow clay and gosh, I really enjoyed just taking it from the packet straight to the pasta machine. What I didn't enjoy was my pasta machine poo. I should really take apart my trusted Atlas and give it a good deep clean. Did you know that the new models come with easily removable blades? Such a game changer. So if you are in need of a pasta machine, seek out Mercato Atlas newer models. At first, the clay was a little crumbly, but nothing a few passes through the pasta machine couldn't fix. I immediately noticed how different Das Smart feels to the touch. It's sticky enough to bond itself, yet not as sticky as Primo. It also feels like one of the most structured clays I've ever worked with so far, which made me think it could be great for making petals. More experimenting is definitely needed here. I know some people have mentioned their clay feeling a bit oily, but I didn't experience that at all. It makes me wonder whether that issue might be limited to certain colors or specific batches made. Since this clay is still relatively new to the market, I haven't seen many artists using it yet, so I can't provide a full deep dive into the potential issues, but I plan to use Das Smart in more upcoming projects, so I'll keep you updated with everything I learn along the way. The sand-colored clay needed a bit more conditioning than the yellow, but once softened, I mixed the two together to create a new shade. It resulted in a beautiful muted yellow, but I wanted to make sure I was getting close to the right tone, so I pulled out some pasta I bought during my trip to Italy, the same trip where I attended Kathleen Dustin's polymer clay handbag workshop, so let me know if you'd like to see a vlog about that experience. After comparing the clay to 3 different types of pasta, I felt confident that I could add even more sand color to the mix. I am one of these makers that doesn't write down the color recipes unless I am really planning to make a large quantity of the same project. I usually mix as I go when required, but I am still curious to know what the majority of you are doing in your creative space. Do you keep the sample chips or a notebook with color recipes written down? Let me know in the comments. Maybe we should do a color mixing challenge together in the future. In the end, I think I used 1 block of yellow and 2 blocks of sand clay. You can roll out clay sticks by hand, but since I already have a polymer clay extruder at home, I will be putting it to work. This is Lucy Clay Check Extruder. The name used to confuse me, but once you know that this is an extruder that is manufactured in Czech Republic, the name makes sense. This is not the 2025 redesigned tool, it's an older version of this product. I am using a cordless drill to make this extruding process a lot quicker. Usually extruders are being manually operated, but this tool came with a drill adapter, so we could work smarter, not harder. Somehow I lost the footage when I added these extruder adapters from Makins inside the green circle disc, but I can make a separate video of this if anyone has questions. Now out of battery. I used to use Fimo extruder and my hands would always hurt the same way as if you did monkey bars in the gymnasium, but this extruder is like a Ferrari of all extruders. Here you can see the result of combining Makins extruder adapter with another extruder disc. It makes all the shapes hollow inside, and I thought it is absolutely perfect for making the macaroni and cheese food from polymer clay. I cut the yellow snake into 2 centimeter pieces to create little macaronis. After cutting, the ends can look slightly distorted, so now we'll tidy them up. First, gently squeeze each piece between your fingers to reshape the tube, then use a small bowl tool to soften the sharp edges, rounding them out for a more natural macaroni shape. You can run the bowl tool along both the inside and outside edges to achieve a nice smooth finish. Once happy with either end of the piece, hold the ends and gently squeeze them toward one another like shown. Let me show you one more time and then you can continue making around 30 more pieces on your own. If you don't have an extruder or an extruder adapter at home, you can simply roll out the clay snake by hand or by using a coffee coaster as a rolling tool. Once you've cut it into 2 centimeter pieces, use a bowl tool to press a small dent into each end. These dents don't need to be very deep. We'll be pouring a cheese sauce over the macaroni later, so the slight indentation will give the illusion that they're filled with sauce. Now we'll cover our lid mold with a sheet of foil before placing the macaroni pieces inside. Don't arrange them too neatly or like a perfect game of Tetris. When you pour a real macaroni into a bowl, it lands randomly, each piece at a different angle, and that's exactly the look we want to recreate. Vary the direction of each piece, but make sure they're all touching one another, as we want the lid topper to cure into one solid piece once finished. Remember to leave the area where the lid will be inserted uncovered. It needs that space to fit into the cup properly. At this stage, I actually made a design flaw. I'm curious if you noticed it. I'll point it out after curing as we'll come back to fix it later. My initial thought was to edit the mistake out, but then I realized it's more helpful to keep it in and show how choices like this can affect the final design, and that making mistakes is completely normal. We'll learn from them and we can fix them too. This is what my macaronis look like together, and I think it's starting to come together nicely. Das do not make liquid polymer clay, but you know who does? Sculpey! They sent me this set of liquid clay in primary colors, and now we'll be mixing our cheese sauce. If you do not have the colored liquid clay at home, you can use the clear one you already have and add colors to it yourself. I'm using translucent liquid clay as the base, and to tint it, I added some yellow liquid clay. This is a good moment for me to mention that liquid Sculpey should always be mixed before use. These bottles I'm using came fresh from the manufacturer, but older bottles tend to develop thicker lumps at the bottom over time, so make sure to give yours a good mix before you start. To make it look even more like cheese, I also mixed in just a touch of red. The combination gave me this nice soft orange color. I mixed it by using a bowl tool because it was closest at hand, although a spatula would definitely have been a smarter choice for this job. Now we'll cover our macaroni with the cheese sauce. I was doing this with a bowl tool, which took forever to do, so I had to speed up the footage to the maximum. Try to avoid getting liquid clay on the straw opening, but do not worry if a little spills over. It can be cleaned up later. This is what I made, and now we will pop it in the oven for half an hour. It's been just over half an hour. Please ignore the mess on the desk. I started working on the spaghetti in the meantime. It just makes more sense during editing to group all the macaroni footage together. I removed the macaroni from the mold by lifting the foil, and although some of the liquid clay spilled onto the mold, it wiped off easily while still warm. I'm really happy to see that the underside of the macaroni picked up the cup shape perfectly, and peeling it away from the foil was effortless too. The layer of liquid clay in the straw area was thin enough and still warm that I could simply pull it off with my fingers. Now it's time to taste it on a cup. And here it is, the moment of realization. I made a design mistake, and there's nothing in the stopper structure to keep it securely in place on top of the cup. I should have added one more piece of macaroni on the opposite side of the straw so the pieces could hug it and hold everything in position. You can also see that the macaroni layer doesn't quite reach the very edge of the Stanley lid, so now I'll make few more macaroni pieces by hand, which also gives me a chance to show you an alternative technique. First, I rolled out a log of clay to match the thickness of the macaroni pieces I already made. Then, using my bowl tool, I pressed into one end and gently moved it in the circular motion to create a nice rounded opening. I repeated the same process on the opposite end and finally shaped the piece into a gentle curve so that it matches the macaroni we made earlier. Let me show you the process one more time. Then I'll place the piece onto the actual Stanley cup lid to check the positioning of where the missing polymer clay macaroni pieces need to be added. I will also insert the straw back in the lid to make sure I'm leaving enough space for it to fit properly later on. Once I'm happy with the placement, everything will need to be removed from the real lid and transferred back into the mold for a second cure in the oven. Currently, the mold is already in the oven curing the spaghetti topper, which we'll be working on next. During filming, I worked on both lid toppers almost simultaneously. Once one design went into the oven, I started prepping the next one to make the process more time efficient. This explains why you'll see the spaghetti in the moment. After looking at the current composition, I realized that the remaining gaps are too small to fit full macaroni pieces, unless I start layering them on top of each other. That would make the topper quite bulky, so instead I'll make a few half macaroni shapes. These will face upwards and will be filled with the liquid polymer clay cheese sauce. May I share a fun cultural fact with you? In Latvia, the Baltic country where I'm from, we don't really have ready meals like this. You can buy frozen meat dumplings, vegetable mixes, or pancakes filled with meat or jam, but not fully prepared frozen meals like in the UK or the USA. When I moved to Scotland, I had a major culture shock seeing macaroni available in cans and as frozen microwave meals too. By the way, I don't have a microwave at home either. But when my dad visited, he was just as shocked. We went to the grocery stores to explore the local food, and he even started taking photos of the frozen food aisle. He never takes photos of anything really, but the idea of frozen macaroni was so wild to us, he couldn't resist. Cultural differences, right? While I was making the missing macaroni pieces, the spaghetti topper finished curing, so I had my base mold back. That means we can start assembling the macaroni lid topper for its second and final curing session. First, place the foil back into the mold, and you can reuse the same piece from before as long as it didn't tear for you after the first cure. I added a small amount of liquid clay to the edges of the already cured pieces so the raw polymer clay would adhere better. Now we'll mix the liquid clay again for the cheese sauce. This time I'm deliberately pouring some of the yellow liquid clay into the fake macaroni openings to create the illusion that a few pieces are completely filled with sauce. You can add as much as you like. I didn't go overboard because I wanted the individual macaroni pieces to remain visible. Therefore, on some pieces, I only added sauce in the center of the macaroni, but on other pieces, I added it in a place where the two pieces would bond together. And this is also helping to fuse the whole dish into one solid piece. I think this somewhat random yet deliberate placement looks more natural this way. If you prefer your mac and cheese with any extra sauces, this is your moment to lean into it. I personally wanted to keep mine fairly plain, a bit like supermarket ready meals. Once the macaroni was fully cured, I checked that it fits nicely in the real Stanley Cup lid, and I was really happy with the result. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't experience any oiliness in the cured clay, and it looks lovely and matte at this stage. However, I wanted it to appear freshly cooked and shiny, so I sealed it with varathane polyurethane varnish that I decanted into a smaller container. Of course, you can use your favorite varnish for this step. Now we're doing a little bit of time traveling, as we need to jump back to the start of the spaghetti making process. Since I made the macaroni first, I had to swap the discs in the extruder. This is what the adapter and disc look like once removed from the extruder. Next, we'll choose the disc with 3 smaller holes. This is also the moment when I sacrificed my nail clippers. As you can see, I had never used these discs before, so I had to remove one from the metal set it came attached to. That left 2 small metal tails behind, which prevented the disc from sliding into the extruder properly. I really should have gone straight in with the industrial pliers from the toolbox. I underestimated how strong this metal was, and I thought that nail clippers would have been better than jewelry pliers, which aren't exactly heavy-duty tools. Lesson learned. Success! The newer Lucy clay extruder discs are now made individually, so this issue no longer exists if you are buying a set from now onwards. Anyway, I had to mix more clay, and here are the color proportions I used to mix my spaghetti shade. And I rolled the clay out into a log to go straight into the extruder. I don't know about you, but I really enjoy watching things being extruded. So I'll be quiet for a moment and let us enjoy this process in silence. That's enough spaghetti. We really do not need a lot, as gaps between these strands will make it look more bulky than it is. Now let's make meatballs. That smart bronze metal clay has a very subtle metallic shine, but it's nowhere near as pronounced as metallics from other brands, and for that reason it will work for the meatballs. I did not condition this clay in the pasta machine, instead I just smushed it into balls with my fingers. It's not only okay for it to be uneven, it's actually preferred in this occasion. Unfortunately, I was losing all the uneven texture as I was manipulating clay. It was an unusually warm day when I filmed this. Once shaped into a ball, I cut it in half to reduce the height of the meatball and to give it a flat bottom that can rest against the lid. Then I realized that I prefer the edges to be much more rounded, so I reshaped these by hand as shown. Even though by pushing the edges downward and inward I was making it back into a ball again, I then stretched the edges downward, shaping it into kind of a chocolate truffle shape. This is the texture I had, but I felt it needed to look a little more rough, so I pulled out one of my texture sponges. These are apparently fish tank filters that us polymer clayers love for texturing, and if you do not already have this in your toolkit, get a set from Polymer Week, as it comes with 4 different types. Okay, I am happy with this texture, but not this color. Real homemade meatballs usually have some parts a little more cooked than others, and the color is not super even, so let's use some soft pastels to add a little more depth to this polymer clay meat. There are no fancy tools necessary for this step. Have an old-fashioned playtime that allows you to get messy and dirty. You know how we all played in puddles and sandboxes as kids? Getting dirty builds immune system, and I think that getting messy when creating is the same level of fun, but now in our adult years. These pigments are also helping to dull the metallic shine in this clay. I did not purposely seek out the metallic brown for this project. It is what Das kindly sent me for trying out, and it happened to be a super nice color that fitted this project. You can see I got a little lazy here and started brushing the pastel stick against the clay, but hey, it works! That's the meatball prep done, so let's tidy and wash our hands. The timer was about to go off for the macaronis that were in the oven at this stage. I used the same bit of foil once again. I'm such a cheapskate, I know, but I recommend that you also reuse where possible. It's better for environment and for your bank account too. In here, I used the same little circle cutter to push a bit of foil through it. This piece will now act as a little guide straw for me whilst layering polymer clay spaghetti on the lid mold. I will now fast forward through the part where I'm placing the polymer clay strands onto the lid. At this stage, I decided that my meatballs were a little too large for my liking. Since they haven't been cured yet, it's easy to adjust their size. Simply hold the meatball by the bottom and pinch away some of the excess clay. Then use your blade to cut off the pinched section, giving the meatball a flat base once again. I will fast forward once again while I continue layering the polymer clay spaghetti. Make sure to cover the meatballs but allow them to peek out through the strands. We want the illusion that they've been mixed into the dish rather than simply placed on top. Once all the polymer clay spaghetti strands were placed on the lid, it was time to make the tomato sauce. For this, I used red liquid polymer clay from Sculpting mixed with translucent liquid clay. The red on its own was too bright, so I added a small amount of blue liquid clay to dull it down and aim for a deeper wine-like red. Since I was eyeballing the proportions, I ended up adding a bit too much blue. More blue than red will push the color toward purple, while red with just a tiny touch of blue creates a rich burgundy tone. Since my mix turned out too dark, I added some yellow to brighten it back up. And because yellow and blue combine to make green, which sits opposite red on the color wheel, this actually worked in my favor by dulling the red slightly while bringing the color back into balance. Once mixed, pour the tomato sauce into the center of the spaghetti. Unlike mac and cheese, where the sauce usually coats the entire dish, spaghetti in Italian-inspired restaurants is often served with the sauce poured on top and concentrated in the center, rather than being pre-mixed throughout. If you accidentally splash the red liquid clay somewhere you didn't intend to, simply grab a cotton bud, the kind typically used for cleaning ears, and gently wipe the sauce away. Next, I grabbed a paintbrush and applied a thin layer of transparent liquid polymer clay over the spaghetti strands that weren't covered in tomato sauce. This helps the clay bond to itself without me having to apply pressure, which could then distort the shape of the spaghetti. It also makes the overall piece more durable, and since that smart cures with a matte finish, this step helps the spaghetti look freshly boiled rather than dry and uncooked. In this reference photo, I noticed small sprinkles of green herbs, and I think this little detail will finish off the dish nicely. I started by rolling out a thin snake from green clay and noticed that due to the room temperature, the clay was quite soft. This allowed me to stretch it simply by pulling rather than rolling it further. Once it was thin enough, I began cutting tiny pieces with a craft knife and placing them directly onto the pasta as I worked. Using my index finger, I gently guided the clay from the scalpel onto the tomato sauce. Add as many herb pieces as you like. I'll speed this clip up until the point where I can show you the finished piece ready for oven curing. That's it, ready to go in the oven, and listen out in a few moments for that satisfying peeling foil noise. Yay, it's cured! I also find it incredibly satisfying when a fun idea comes together in a single curing session, meaning you can use it almost straight away instead of spending weeks trying to find the time to make it and test multiple prototypes and so on. Let's give it a quick visual inspection. I'm really happy with how full this cup topper looks and how nicely rounded all the edges are. There's a small cluster of liquid clay on the side here, but it can be gently peeled away with your fingers without damaging the lid topper. Now let's do a quick test to see if the straw fits nicely in its dedicated slot. Oh, perfection! Overall, there's no sticky feeling at all, and I love how it looks, but I still want to make it a little shinier, so let's add some varnish now. This is the varnish I like to use. It's Varathane Ultimate Polyurethane, a water-based crystal clear satin varnish originally designed to protect furniture from scratching. It comes in larger tins, but I've decanted mine into a smaller container with a built-in brush for easier application. I believe this little glass bottle is from a Fimo varnish I used to have and eventually ran out of. Buying this larger tub worked out cheaper in the long run than purchasing multiple bottles of Fimo varnish. I also found that Fimo varnish can sometimes dry white in creases where a thicker layer is applied, whereas this furniture varnish dries clear even in detailed areas. That being said, it can also still dry white if applied too heavily, so it's best to use it in thin coats and build them up gradually once each layer has dried. Before we get to the final reveal, let's talk about those dramatic headlines surrounding Stanley Cups harboring mold. When you buy a new Stanley Cup, it comes with a care and use leaflet explaining how to clean it properly, so I'm not quite sure why people found it so shocking that the separate parts of the lid can get dirty and need a clean. In case you didn't know, this is how you take the lid apart for cleaning. There were also numerous videos on TikTok where creators claimed they had a hack showing 3 different ways the lid could be positioned. However, when you buy the cup, this information is already included in the paper label, so it isn't really a hack at all, it's simply the intended use explained by the manufacturer. Either way, now you know all the facts and you also know how to make a fully 3-dimensional Stanley Cup topper from polymer clay, which in my opinion is way cooler than the flat ones everyone else has. I hope you enjoyed this hangout session with me and that you're now itching to make a topper of your own. Be sure to tag me in your creation so I can see what you make, and let's hang out again soon.
Thanks for watching.